Okay, this is going to be lecture number 10. Number 10 is called Manifest Destiny. We're going to discuss the American people expanding from coast to coast here on this time period. I wanted to start off by telling you about our Western frontier. The American Western frontier is going to begin actually in 1803. The Louisiana Purchase begins the western expansion of the United States. Right behind Lewis and Clark, you have Zebulon Pike. Mr. Pike first goes up into Minnesota trying to find the headwaters of the Mississippi River system. He can't find it. He comes back to St. Louis and goes across the middle part of the country out to Colorado. He's the one who founded Pikes Peak. And Zebulon Pike is exploring right behind Lewis and Clark. Lewis and Clark gets home in 1806. He starts in 1806. And he spends several years exploring the middle part of the country. Then you have Stephen Long. Stephen Long is going to be here in 1819, and he's going to explore what is known as the Santa Fe Trail. And he's going to head down towards Southern California on the Santa Fe Trail. Then we have John Fremont. Mr. Fremont in the early 1840s is going to map out what is called the overland trails. These are the trails that leave Missouri and Iowa heading toward the West Coast. And he is going to mark off what is called the overland trails. And then we finally will have the Transcontinental Railroad. It'll be surveyed in the 1850s. Construction starts in 1862 time period. And by 1869, we have one train line across the country. By 1872, we'll have 5 train lines across the country. So the Transcontinental Railroad goes a long way in conquering the West and bringing in the new frontiers. Now, in September of 1810, the 10th day of September 1810, Spain is going to tell Mexico that they've got 12 years to get ready for freedom from Spain, that Spain is ready to leave the hemisphere. Okay, so in September of 1810, Mexico begins to start formulating their new government. They have about 12 years to get it all set up before Spain leaves. August the 8th, 1812. On August the 8th, 1812, 120 Louisiana people, they're rebels, Louisiana rebels, go across the Sabine River, which is a border between Texas and Louisiana. They go across the Sabine River trying to declare that Western territory is part of Louisiana. And Mexico becomes concerned over this invasion. They do not want the Americans into their territories. Okay? On the 26th day of December, 1813, the Spanish government in Mexico City is going to grant Moses Austin permission to establish a colony west of the Sabine River. This Angleton colony is going to be called Texas. Now, this early colony is going to be from the Sabine River to Houston, back over toward Austin, and then on up toward Dallas-Fort Worth and up to the Oklahoma border. It's not going to be a very big area to start off with. It's most of the piney woods of Texas, or as we call today, East Texas. Okay? Mr. Moses Austin tells Mexican government that he is not going to allow any slaveholders in this territory, that this area will be free of slavery. The people who come in here are going to be sober, hardworking, and become good Catholics. The Catholic Church is the official church of Mexico. So Moses Austin is going to tell them we're going to be Catholics, we're going to be hard workers, we'll not be drinking and causing all kinds of problems, okay? And we'll have no slaves in our area. And Mr. Austin promises that he's going to hand select these people who come in here. Well, guys, a few months later, Moses Austin dies. And his son Stephen takes over this new colony, this new borderland between the United States and Mexico. And he's going to choose 300 people to come in here and to occupy this territory. Okay? This land is 18,000 square miles, and they must follow the laws of Mexico. All right? In 1821, Mexico becomes a republic, Spain leaves, and Mexico writes a constitution. And in their constitution, they make 2 important statements. Number 1, Mexican territory always belongs to Mexico. Nobody can occupy, steal, or through war take any of their land. Their land is not up for sale. So the new rule here, guys, is that the Southwest is not available to anybody else. It belongs to Mexico forever. You might want to claim for your own for a short period of time, but it's still their territory. They still own it. They still control it. That's part of the border situation on today on the Mexican border. They still believe that this land is still theirs and that we're just squatting on their land. And so therefore, people come across the border believing that they're still part of Mexico. So Texas, Mexico, Arizona, California has this problem of immigration in the border because of these old days here when Mexico declared all this territory theirs and nobody could take it away from them. It's not available to anybody else during this time period. Okay? Also in 1821, Mexico outlawed slavery. They outlawed slavery, making sure that Southerners will not come into Texas. That's the whole idea behind the issue of the slavery, to make it fix that nobody will want to come in here because they cannot bring their slaves with them. Well, guys, by 1830, over 7,000 Americans have flooded into the east parts of Texas. There are over 4,000 people of mixed ancestry. We call them Tex-Mex in today's society. And these people are all living in Texas. So you've got here about 11,000 people who live in this area, guys, and they identify themselves as being Texans. Okay? Now, Texas does not have a major port city. Galveston and Houston are extremely swampy. It's going to take several years to get all this cleared out, to get a port ready for you. You won't see really a port here, guys, until the Civil War time period. So the early Texans do not really have a good port. Now, if you live up toward the Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana border, you do have the Red River. And a lot of folks did use the Red River to transport cotton and cattle to the marketplace of New Orleans. But that's very few people who did this. Okay, so this folks has a little bit of trouble with their economy because they're having a hard time trading because there's no real good trade center for them to go to in this time period. Okay, so here comes cattle ranching. The cows they use are the longhorn steers that came from Spain. The cows have come from Spain. All right, and they're the longhorn here in this time period. In 1831, a large number of Irishmen come to Texas. They come here trying to find land to live on. They have left Ireland because of economic situations in Ireland. They come over here to settle. At the same time, a large number of Germans come over to this region. And they are also looking for a new place to settle. And of course, as you'll see them go across Texas, they're going to finally make their way toward the hill country and start building cities and towns out here like Fredericksburg and New Braunfels and Wimberley and all those cities out here in west and over here in the central part of Texas in the hill country, that land just west of Austin. So you'll start seeing the Germans come in during this time period also. Okay? By 1835, Southerners begin to come into Texas and they bring their slaves with them. And this is going to cause a real problem here for Mexico. All right? The first incident takes place in June of 1832. It's called the Battle of Velasco. The Battle of Velasco. Okay? This is going to be a battle between the Mexican army and the Texans who have occupied areas that Mexico has declared as theirs. This is not part of Texas. They're on the outside fringes of Texas. And so they're trying to push these folks out of this area back into the colony of Texas. All right? 14th of November, 1832. Because of violence along the Texas-Mexican border, the people of Texas are going to form a new group who call themselves the Texas Rangers. The Texas Rangers are formed on the 24th of November, 1832. Okay? Now, in March of 1836, the people of Texas declared that they're independent of Mexico. And this is going to cause a real problem here. Here comes the General President of Mexico. He's both general and the president. His name is Santa Anna, and he's going to come to a little place that is called San Antonio. At San Antonio, on the headwaters of the San Antonio River, is an old villa, an old Spanish villa that is called the Alamo. And here on March the 3rd, 1836, Santa Anna is going to attack the Alamo. It's going to be a 3-day battle here. Now, Santa Anna has one policy toward POWs, toward prisoners of war. He does not accept them. If you are captured by the Mexican army and you're on the enemy side and you're captured, you'll not be a POW because they're going to line all you guys up and shoot you. They do not take any captives. So here at San Antonio, after a 3-day siege here that takes place, Santa Anna is going to take the survivors of the Alamo, which probably included Davy Crockett. They line them up and they shoot them. Okay? That's the policy of Santa Anna on all these battles here. On March the 27th, at a place called the Goliad, it's spelled Goliad, at Goliad, Santa Anna will execute over 350 Texans. He captured them, he slaughtered them, 360 of them, okay? On April the 21st, 1836, Sam Houston has laid a trap for Santa Anna. Now, he's going to bait him in the same way that Andrew Jackson baited the British Navy at the Battle of New Orleans. He's going to make him into and he's going to do like Nathaniel Greene did also in Georgia and Carolinas during the Revolutionary War. He's going to bait him. He's going to go in there. He allows a female spy to go in and become the mistress of Santa Anna, and that's how he gets information back and forth. And he's going to have a little fox hunt here across southern Texas. And he's going to lead Santa Anna's army into a trap just below Houston. It's in between Houston and the city of Pasadena. It's a big swamp down here. And Andrew Jackson's policy in New Orleans is what Sam Houston does here at Houston. He's going into a swampy area and he builds a barricade. He builds a barricade that Santa Anna cannot get through. Okay? The battle takes place on the 21st day of April, 1836. All right? They come running off in here, and within 18 minutes, Sam Houston has killed over 630 Mexicans in the army, and he's also captured over 700 people in this army. He totally annihilated this army here. When he gets these 700 people all lined up to execute them like Santa Anna did, he's going down the line to see who all's in that line. He sees any faces that he recognizes. And of course, he's going to run right into Santa Anna. He's wearing the lieutenant's coat. And Sam Houston pulls him out and sets him to the side and says, "You're the first one who's going to die." And Santa Anna broke down, pleading for his life. And Sam Houston says, "I will let you go free if you give me all this territory for Texas. Take it all the way from Mexico and give it to me for East Texas." And this general agrees to do this. When Santa Anna goes home, he is fired from his jobs. He's no longer general, nor is he the president of Mexico. He's exiled. He'll find himself going to Cuba and later on going down to Puerto Rico. All right, he will not come back until 1847 during the war with the Americans, the Mexican War with the Americans here. So Sam Houston is going to use trench warfare just like Andrew Jackson has used, just like the Creek Indians had used at the Battle at Horseshoe Bend, and he's going to be very successful with it. And all of a sudden, you start seeing trench warfare being taught at West Point Academy. All right. So this makes a big impression on West Point Academy of how they won these wars in the South by using these barricades and finding ways to stop the enemy through formations across the land here. Okay, on May the 14th, 1836, Texas will sign a Treaty of Velasco, the Treaty of Velasco, that frees them from Mexico. And of course, Santa Anna is exiled because of this. On the 5th of September, 1837, the 5th of September, 1837, Mexican citizens approved the annexation of Mexico by the United States. They approved to join the United States. But Martin Van Buren is going to refuse them because there's no free state to come in as a slave state. So from 1837 until 1845, Texas is a republic. They're a nation of their own here. In 1837, they're recognized by the United States, Great Britain, France, the Netherlands, and Belgium. So Texas is a state here, guys, starting in 1830. It's going to be a nation here starting 1837. There'll be a Republic of Texas until 1845 when they finally will join statehood here in this time period. Now, it's also here in the late 1830s, early 1840s, that people start looking toward the west for settlement here. Okay? They start looking westward for settlement. Remember, we still have that old land index of 1820. You can get 100 acres of land for $80 if you go out to these western territories. Get it surveyed, get a clear title, and it's your land for $100 for 80 acres. And a lot of people decide to head westward here. The best way to go is by schooner wagons. These schooner wagons are about 8 foot long. They're about 6 foot wide. And everything you own goes on to a schooner wagon. All right. The trip from the east, which is going to be Missouri and Iowa, that trip is going to take 2,000 miles to accomplish it. And you're doing good if you get 10 miles a day on this trip. So you're going to spend several hundred days trying to get across the country in these schooner wagons here in this time period. All right. Let's say, for instance, that you're a blacksmith and you're going to move west. You're going to go to Oregon country. You get a wagon just for the family to ride in. You got 8 kids. You're going to need a big wagon. You fill that wagon full of pillows and blankets and all this kind of stuff. And you make sure the back of the wagon is tied together and is secure. Because if you go across rough roads, those kids can bounce out of the wagon and get run over. So you want to make sure that these kids are safe in the wagon. So the mom or the oldest girls are in charge of the wagon here up front, the ones the kids are in. Right behind that wagon might be all your furniture in another wagon. And you carry your bedsteads, your mattresses, your chest of drawers, your tables, and your chairs. And that'll be in the second wagon. Sometimes you might need three or four wagons to take all this stuff in. The third wagon is going to contain all your tools that you need for blacksmithing. So your entire shop is packed into the third wagon. The fourth wagon is going to be your food stuff. It's easier to get to. So you'll have your dried beans, your dried peas, you'll have your salted beef and all this stuff, your salted pork on this back wagon. And then if you got a large number of cows or horses that you're trying to get across the Great Plains, and you will run out of food from time to time, you got a wagon load of corn. So you have the children's wagon, you have the furniture wagon, you have your artisan wagon, you have your food wagon, and then you'll have your grain wagon, okay, to carry your grains in, okay? When you go across the Great Plains, you want to go in a wagon train. The more people you go with, the safer and the easier it's going to be on this trip. And I want to tell you something. If I was going to cross the Great Plains in a wagon, I'd want a blacksmith with me. I want a cooper with me who makes wheels, makes barrels. I want me a sawyer with me. I want a carpenter with me. I want somebody who's good at doctoring, either a bone doctor or a medical doctor. All right? Might want a midwife in that group also to have those children along the way, to birth those children. Okay? I want a veterinarian with me. So if your horse or your cows or one of your animals comes up lame, then you can take care of that animal. Oh, by the way, there might be another wagon on board that wagon train that includes your small animals, like your little pigs and your rabbits and your chickens and things of that nature. So you do have a wagon train. You might have as many as 8 wagons lined up. You got 8 wagons that are lined up together, tied together. You're going to need 12 horses in order to pull it, or 12 oxen or whatever. Okay? You also want to have at least 6 horses that follows behind. You want these horses because if one of your horses comes up lame, you can switch them out and get that other one healed up as you travel and have the other one pull the wagon train. So you want plenty of animals out here to help you with the wagon train. You'll also bring your milk cows with you. And you might have 5 or 6, maybe 12 cows that's following behind you. And y'all know that cows are social animals and they love being around people, and these cows will keep up with you as they travel. Okay? Now, if you got a 8-year-old or 12-year-old little boy, you'll have them go through and herd the hogs. That'd be their job, is herding the hogs. That'll keep them out of trouble and keep them on the path, on the right road here during this time period. Okay? your teenagers, your teenage boys. These boys will have their own horses and they will ride ahead of the wagon train. They'll act as scouts and they'll find the rivers, where to go through and forge the river so it's not so hard to cross. And they'll go through and try to find a way around a real swampy area or an area that'd be hard to go across or make your way across this, to transport yourself across this area. They'll find other alternatives, other routes to take here in the time period. Usually these young boys around 2 o'clock in the afternoon will start hunting for the evening food. You got several hundred people in your wagon train, you're going to need a good-sized buffalo or a good-sized elk or another large animal to feed these people with. If you go through and you kill a buffalo or you go through and you kill an elk, you get it skinned out, you get down to a river, get it skinned out, and then you go through and you wash it up real good, and you build yourself a big fire, and you start roasting this animal. If you start roasting an elk, say around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, by 7 o'clock, it's pretty well done. And you can start pulling meat off the sides of that elk and eating it here in this time period. And so these kids would always try to find some food to have to go along with the dried beans or the cornbread or whatever else you're going to have that evening for dinner here. Some kind of a stew or soup or whatever. So these kids are always ahead of time. They have to be really careful because this area has got lots of dangers. You got cougars, you got wolves, you got buffalo to contend with, and buffalo herds will stampede and they will kill people that run across you. You'll have trouble also with snakes, various kinds of snakes. And y'all know that snakes look like sticks. If you're not careful, you pull a pile of sticks up, and there might be a snake inside those sticks. If it hits you in the face or in your neck or your chest, you're going to be gone within a matter of minutes because your body cannot withstand it. Now, if it hits you on the leg or the hand, you can be saved. But anything above your waistline, you ain't going to make it. So you got to be really careful out here that you don't get snake bitten. A lot of folks died on the overland trails. They died from accidents, being cut by axes, trying to cut little timber or trying to cut firewood, and the wood has rotted, and you go through the wood and hit your leg and cut your calf, and you bleed to death. That's not uncommon here in this time period. Fire was a major problem. Little kids would be out there playing around the campfire and fall in it. And a lot of little kids burn to death in these campfires here. So you have to be really careful about your children to make sure they didn't bounce out of the wagon and get run over, or they didn't get burned up, or they get a hold of a snake of some kind. So it's going to be a very treacherous trip across the country here during this time period. Okay? 30,000 people go across the overland trails between 1840 and 1860. That's a lot of people. 300,000 people go the overland trails across the country between 1840 and 1860. Okay? Now, if I was going to go to California, and you could go over the overland trails either way, the overland trails would put you out of the Platte River up in Idaho, and here you could decide to go in one or two directions. You could go down to the southwest, down to California, or you go toward the northwest into Oregon country. If I was going to go, I'd go the Santa Fe Trail. I'd go to Leavenworth, Kansas, and I'd go during the wintertime. You could leave Leavenworth, Kansas in the wintertime, and you could go down, heading down toward the panhandle of Texas, and make your way into Arizona, Mexico, and Arizona into California. Now, why would I want to go this way? Because in that southwest corner, you're going to have mission towns. Mission towns means that you have 7-Elevens along the way. You can get you a taco along the way, you get something to drink along the way, and so forth. If you go up on the Platte River route, on the overland trail, there's nothing up there. You're on your own all the way across the Great Plains. And you got to hunt for food. You get the Texas Panhandle and start heading down toward El Paso and going across that southern tier, you'll start finding little villa towns, little mission villas from the Spanish, Mexicans, and they will take care of you down here. Got a little bit of money, you can buy goods and so forth in these mission towns. The overland trail was only good from March until October. The big snows came, you were stuck where you were. You could not go anywhere. You had to travel during the spring and the summer on the overland trail. On the Santa Fe Trail, you could start as late as October, November, and make your way down through here and be in California by the 1st of April. You can arrive in enough time to start growing your crops. You arrive in Oregon country in September and October, you don't have time to start a garden. You're gonna still be hunting until the springtime comes and you get your garden plots put out. So it's gonna be a little bit different how you travel here in this time period, okay? And a lot of folks went both ways here across the country, okay? So remember, we have the overland trails, we have the interest in the areas of Texas for settlement and so forth. In 1835, John O'Sullivan, the editor of the North American magazine, writes an article about manifest destiny. And he tells the American people that God has planned for the American people to occupy all of the land, from the Atlantic to the Pacific, that God wants America in charge of all this territory. Even though the Russians and the British are trying to claim the Northwest and Oregon and Washington territories, in the Southwest, you have the Spanish and the Mexicans trying to control that territory. But he is saying that God has a plan for America to take this land away from the other people. Okay? It's part of manifest destiny here in this time period. Well, guys, in 1843, the American people are tired of John Tyler as president. John Tyler has been a very disappointing president. As a matter of fact, the Whig Party disowned him, told him he could not run as a Whig for re-election. In the same voice, the Democratic Party told John Tyler he couldn't come back. He's a man with no party. He's a man of no party. That's how bad his presidency was. We'll have two presidents, guys, who will face this problem of being ignored by their political parties. The first one is John Tyler. The second will be Millard Fillmore. Millard Fillmore also lost his party here in this time period. Okay? So he cannot run for re-election because they don't want him back. So in 1844's election, you're going to have two important people who run for the presidency. Henry Clay is going to run for the fourth time for the presidency. Henry Clay just can't seem to win it here in this time period. Henry Clay, of course, is from Kentucky, and he's a Whig candidate. He's running for the Whig Party. All right. The Democratic Party, the party of Andrew Jackson, is going to choose James K. Polk. Mr. Polk is from Tennessee. Okay. This election is extremely close. Mr. Polk won the election by 40,000 votes. He just barely won the election. And out of 40,000 votes, he got 175 electoral votes, which put him over the top. 175 got you in the office of president during this time period. Today it's 270. Okay? So Mr. Polk wins the election. Henry Clay goes into defeat for the fourth time for the presidency in this time period. Mr. Polk told the American people that he's going to finish the job of Andrew Jackson. A lot of historians say that James K. Polk is a bookend to Andrew Jackson. Well, I don't. I think that James Buchanan is a bookend of Andrew Jackson because he's all our Jacksonian presidents. They act just like Andrew Jackson, every one of them. Mr. Polk told the American people that he wants the yeoman farmers to have farmland from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. He wants America to go from sea to shining sea, and the yeoman farmers be the caretakers of all this land. In other words, he believes in the common man, just like Andrew Jackson had during his time period. Mr. Polk believes in states' rights, and he believes in the expansion of cotton culture and the expansion of slavery. So here we are, guys, in 1844. They're still trying to expand cotton culture. They're still trying to expand slavery here on the Democratic Party. And Mr. Polk's behind all this stuff. Okay? Under Polk, under his administration, Texas will gain statehood. On 29th of December, 1845, Texas becomes a state. Okay? The Oregon Territory, south of the 49th parallel, becomes part of the United States. The 49th parallel becomes the northern border between Canada and the United States, and it's still there today, same border here, okay? And we're going to acquire, through war, the northern territories of Mexico. These northern territories include West Texas, West Oklahoma, Colorado, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, and California. This all becomes part of the United States under James K. Polk. He is known as the president who wanted land. The president who wanted land. He's going to add 1.5 million acres to the country. So we really expand the country here during the time of Mr. Polk. Okay, March the 1st, 1845. John Tyler is president until March the 4th. This is his third day away from the end of his presidency. On March the 1st, 1845, John Tyler signs a joint resolution with Congress offering Texas the terms of being annexed. This is on March the 4th, 3 days before Mr. Tyler leaves office. Okay, and Congress in a joint resolution is going to offer Texas annexation. Okay, on June the 4th, 1845, June the 4th, 1845, the Mexican president, whose name is Herrera, that's spelled Herrera, Herrera tells the Americans, if you annex Texas, we're going to declare war on you. Do not do it, but declare war on you. On July the 4th, 1 month later, July the 4th, 1845, the people of Texas vote to be annexed by the United States. So on July the 4th, Texas declares their independence and they want to join the United States. Okay? Worried about war breaking out along the southern border of Texas, President Polk in July will send an order by telegram to Mr. Zachary Taylor. Mr. Taylor is the military governor of the West, and he lives in Fort Smith, Arkansas. All right? And Taylor is ordered to carry his army down to Corpus Christi, Texas. Corpus Christi is the southern border of the Republic of Texas. Okay? He also sends David Conner to prepare a squadron to sail along the Gulf Coast. So we got to have the Navy out in the Gulf along the Texas border, and you'll have Zachary Taylor and his army from the west down here at Corpus Christi. Okay, October. President Polk is going to send the senator from Louisiana down to Mexico City, trying to have a peace treaty, trying to reach an agreement here. And President Polk told John Slidell, the senator from Louisiana, told John Slidell to offer them $30 million for Texas and the Southwest. That is 3 times what we paid for the Louisiana Purchase territory. Now, John Slidell goes off down here, and the Mexican Congress is not very receptive to him. They also are going to lampoon and make fun of President Polk. And so the idea of buying this territory for $30 million is going to fall completely through. It's not going to happen here. And that makes President Polk extremely mad. He's not only mad, he's also mad at Slidell. He thought Slidell didn't do the job he should have done down here. And a lot of you guys know about John Slidell because there's a town on this side of New Orleans called Slidell. If you go Interstate 10 to New Orleans or turn off into Interstate 12 or go Interstate 59 from Slidell. And you know this is a big, huge speed trap out here. You gotta be careful going through Slidell, you get yourself pulled over. You better slow yourself down going through Slidell. I used to live in Baton Rouge and I know how bad Slidell can be. It's a pretty rough place down here in Slidell, Louisiana. Okay, so President Polk is mad at Slidell because he could not sell the deal here for $30 million. Okay, January 1846. President Polk orders Zachary Taylor's army to leave Corpus Christi and head down to the Rio Grande. He tells Conner to take his squadron down to Veracruz. Now, guys, we have just invaded foreign territory. This territory does not belong to the United States. President Polk has put our troops into harm's way down here by making a move. April 46, we have what is called the Trenton Affair and Brownsville, Texas. President Herrero of Mexico sends his army up here, and they attack the American forces here at Brownsville. It's called the Thornton Affair. Americans are killed and wounded here in Brownsville. May the 8th, 1846. May the 8th, 1846. We have the Battle of Palo Alto, which is near Brownsville. This is your first major battle in what's going to be known as the American-Mexican War, or the Mexican War, as a lot of people call it here today. Okay, so on May the 8th, 1846, at Palo Alto, we have a major battle. Now, all this goes back to President Polk, mostly by telegram, and on May the 13th, 1846, President Polk tells the American people that American blood has been shed on American soil, and he wants a war against Mexico. American blood has been shed on American soil. That's a lie. This blood was shed on Mexican territory. We're in no man's land between Brownsville and the Rio Grande. And he uses this as a rattling cry, guys, to have a war. So fake news is already in American history over and over again. And this president has lied to the American people and told us that we've been attacked on our territory, and we had not. We had invaded into a foreign territory, and they're trying to run us out. Okay? Now, word is sent from Washington, D.C. out to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Now, there's no telegraphs out here, guys. It's got to go by sailing ship. It's going to take 85 days for the news to get out here. And it's going to go to the American Navy. Now, this goes out in 1845. This goes out before any of this other stuff happens. And by the time you have the Thornton Affair, and by the time you have the Palo Alto battle, the American fleet is heading into the coastline of California out of Pearl Harbor. The American Navy is heading toward California. In the meantime, orders are sent to John Fremont. He's the man who marched on the Overland Trail, and John Fremont is going to lead the army across the country from Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, to Sacramento, California. Okay? Another general by the name of Kearny is going to lead his forces down toward El Paso, Texas. All right? The first major battles of this war will take place in California. I want you guys to realize that California is also a republic. They are a republic during this time period. We invade the Republic of California. There's a lot of people out here who are wealthy Mexicans, wealthy Spaniards who built villas, which are like plantations, all over California. And one by one, the Americans will overtake these plantations, these villas, because these folks are considered to be colored people in the definition of that time period. White supremacy has precedence over anybody of darker complexion. And so these folks will lose their homesteads, will lose their properties as the Americans come in here to claim it. Okay? After spending several months in the Sacramento area fighting this war, the American army under Fremont is going to head to San Francisco. And when they arrive, the American Navy is already here. There will be an urban warfare for the city of San Francisco. How big is San Francisco? They have 1,800 people. They have 1,800 people. The city of Valparaiso has 1,800 households. To get an idea about how big it was, like here in Valparaiso, just kind of a little peninsula area with all these houses on it. Okay? San Francisco soon falls. The Navy sails down the coastline. The Army goes down with it down to Santa Barbara. They take that. They head on down into what is Santa Monica, in Longview, and all this. They take all of that. They head down into the areas of Los Angeles. They take that. They head down to San Diego, and they take all of that area. And once we have certified this whole southwestern side, or this western side of what is going to become the United States, the American Navy sails on down to the Baja. They sail between the Baja on the western coast of Mexico, They're going all the way down to Guatemala, down toward Belize, and down toward the Costa Rican border here of this country. And they're going to the Acapulco coastline, if you will. They're going to occupy this area. Why did the United States Navy blockade from the Baja down to Acapulco? What's the idea behind all this stuff? They figured that Mexico would call for an ally, and their big ally was in the Philippines, and the big ally is Spain. If we blockade the western coast of Mexico, it keeps the Spanish from coming in here and helping out the Mexicans. So part of our battle strategy here is going to be the blockade from Baja down to Acapulco on the western side of Mexico. Pretty smart move. Then Kearny's army and the army of Fremont is going to head across the southern border between Mexico and the United States. It's going to be the areas of Albuquerque, Santa Fe, on down to El Paso. Once they get to El Paso, they're going to turn south and head into Mexican territory down to Monterrey. From Monterrey, they're going to head across to the Gulf Coast, just below Brownsville. And then they start working their way down to Veracruz. Okay? So the United States Army is going to block off the entire northern part of Mexico. They're going to blockade the western part of Mexico. All that really leaves is the Gulf Coast part of Mexico is what it leaves open. President Polk finds a leader for his army, a West Point graduate, been a teacher at West Point, well known for strategy, and his name is Winfield Scott. General Winfield Scott is going to come in charge of this army. Zachary Taylor and the army from the west, this is from Fort Smith, Arkansas, the western army, will be part of it also. Winfield Scott will lead the men from Brownsville, Texas, down to Veracruz, whereas General Winfield Scott will have the entire coast of Mexico bordered on the Gulf side. So he totally blocked off Mexico. The only end open was the southern end, but it's mostly jungle and it'd be hard to get through. As a matter of fact, they called back Santa Anna to help them out in 1847. They're desperate now. He has to come into Cuba and go into the Belize area and come in through the south. He can't get in through the Gulf. It's totally blockaded. So he has a hard time getting back here, Mexico City. It's going to be a more treacherous route than going to Veracruz and across the Gulf. It's all blockaded. All right. Now, here's some stats. Here's some stats for you guys to look at, to think about. Okay. The United States Army had 10,000 soldiers. The Navy was always ready. The Navy is always your first ones in during this time period. They're your main line of defense. So the American Navy is always well supplied with ships and men. They're well trained. They're ready to go at any time. It's the Army that's not. We had 10,000 soldiers in the United States Army. Pretty small army. So therefore, we asked for volunteers. And Southern boys and boys from the Middle West are the ones who joined the American Army. 100,000 young men from Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Louisiana, Arkansas, Texas, Tennessee, Kentucky, Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, Michigan. These are the boys who joined the Army here to fight the war in Mexico. Now, what are they thinking? They're thinking if we win this war, then we'll get land to the west. The land will open up on the southern tier for cotton culture, across the northern tier for farming and industrialization. So both sides, both North and South, the Midwest boys and Southern boys, have the same desires here in this war, and they do fight together. Okay? You've also got a number of boys who are young lieutenants who have never cut their teeth in battle. And these young lieutenants are all West Point trained. These young lieutenants include Robert E. Lee, Joseph Hooker, George Meade, P.T.B. Beauregard, James Longstreet, Thomas Jackson. It's going to include people like McClellan and U.S. Grant and William T. Sherman. All these young men are lieutenants in this war. They're playing together on the same team in the war against Mexico. 15 years later, they're fighting against each other as generals. Reminds me of college football. All these boys play on the same teams in these college football groups, and then they get called the pros. The pro team was the war, Mexican War was a pro team. And then these boys get picked off to become coaches for other teams across the country. And they start playing against each other. One time they're together, and now they're competing against each other as coaches. This is a lot like the Civil War is going to be, guys. I want to tell you, football culture, football strategy has come from the American Civil War. We don't fight wars anymore in America. We play sports. We play ball against each other. Okay? Now, here's the other thing I want you guys to realize. The Mexican army is going to be made of around 35,000 soldiers. 35,000 soldiers. Oh, they'll have volunteers they'll join in with them, but it's going to be a pretty small core army. The United States got 110,000 boys in their army. The difference is 3 to 1. You're going to learn here, guys, that if you have it 3 to 1 in a war, the smaller group will always lose. You cannot win wars when it's 3 to 1. Why do I tell you guys this? Because the United States Army, the Union Army of the Civil War, had 250,000 volunteer soldiers. 2.5 million volunteer soldiers. It's 2.5 million volunteer soldiers. The American South had 800,000 volunteer soldiers. It's 3 to 1. The American South had no real chance of winning this war. Oh, they did hold on as defenders of their country. But once the defensive has broken down, it's all going to come to an end. Another thing they wouldn't want to do in this time period is what happened with Russia and Turkey. Here in this same time period, Russia goes to war against Turkey. They want to expand the Russian Empire down into Turkey and down toward the Middle East, Afghanistan, and on down in this part of the world. The people of Turkey did not want the Russians interfering with them. And so they made allies with the British and the French. Both the British and the French have industrialized their army. They've industrialized their military. The Russians are an agrarian group, whereas India now has industrialization behind them. And industrialization will always win against agrarians. The American South was not paying attention. They were still agrarian. The North was industrialized. And the North will industrialize this war. And the South will have no chance. That's why I keep saying the South, they built textile mills and built industries across the middle part of the South along the Tombigbee River down toward Mobile. It'd been a whole different ball game. But they did not do it. They did not industrialize. They didn't build great railroads. And it's going to cost them this war for doing so in this time period. Okay? Well, guys, in July of 1846, the United States Navy is going to occupy Monterey. On the 16th of August, 1846, Santa Anna returns to Mexico City. He returns to be the general to help them fight against the Americans. In August of 1846, United States forces under Stephen Kearny is going to take all of New Mexico. In September of 1846, Monterey and all of the North Mexico is taken by the United States. So this goes pretty quickly. It's a pretty quick war here, guys. Okay? It's a pretty quick war here in this time period. Okay? Let me go down the list here for a second here. On March the 9th, 1847, March the 9th, 1847, United States troops will land on the beaches at Veracruz. Now, here's the story behind Veracruz. The city is a walled city. When Spain came in here in the mid-1500s and turned this into a big maintenance base for their shipping industry, for their ships to be rebuilt and modified and so forth, overhauled, they rebuilt the city of Veracruz, and Veracruz got a wall around the city. It's a pretty good-sized walled city. It looks a lot like a European walled city in this time period. General Winfield Scott wants to have aerial bombardment into the city. Now, you don't have any airplanes during this time period, but you do have good artillery shells. And so General Winfield Scott calls in a young lieutenant to help him soften up the targets of Veracruz. This young man is going to put the battleships in a crescent moon formation out in the harbor. He's going to carefully line up those artillery weapons, those cannons. He's got to fix that all the cannonballs, all the artillery shells go into the city of Veracruz. We do aerial bombardment. This young man is going to get it so softened up that the American troops will come in here without a shot being fired. The young man who lined all these cannons is named Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee was known for his strategy here in this time period. Okay, once the Americans have taken Veracruz, they're going to head to Mexico City. Okay, now remember they did the softening here, guys. The bombardment took place toward the end of March of 1847. Okay, they started marching here in September, heading toward Mexico City. And once they arrived in Mexico City, they found the city in total turmoil. The wealthy class are fighting the lower class. The lower class will not fight for the wealthy class. By the 1st of October of 1847, the United States has gained control of Mexico City. Winfield Scott sets up his office in Mexico City. One of his main advisors that's with him is going to be Robert E. Lee. For about a 2-week period of time, U.S. Grant is here in the office. But Grant does not stay here very long, just a couple of weeks. All right? But Grant and Lee were together for a couple of weeks here in the office of Winfield Scott. Okay? These two men had been together for a little while. Okay? All right. On August the 4th, 1848, this war has come completely to an end. The American forces have left. So this war started here, guys, in late 1846, and the war here ends in August of 1847 or 1848. That's a little over 18 months. It's not quite 2 years. And so this is a good little war for the Americans here. And this war got the attention of Europe. The Europeans realize you do not mess with the Americans. When they go for war, they go for war. We fight a war like nobody else does. Stealth fighting, blockading the coastlines, guerrilla warfare, the whole 9 yards. And remember, when Winfield Scott and his boys left Veracruz, had Mexico City, they were using the Diary of Hernan Cortez. That was our training manual for warfare in this time period. Okay, so all these guys here made a big difference down here and got the attention of Europe. They said, we ain't gonna mess with those United States. Y'all know, guys, in 1862 time period, England was going to side with the Confederacy. The British were very much discussing joining the Confederacy and fighting against the United States. And they figured by doing so that the South would go right back into the British Empire and they could recapture all of New England and bring back the colonies. They could bring back what they had lost here, guys, in the American Civil War if they joined up with the South. Well, Abraham Lincoln realized that he sent word to Queen Victoria, and he told her, did you see how we destroyed Mexico? Don't think you might not be next. We can go through and blockade that harbor and blockade the Irish Sea and take y'all out pretty quickly. And England backed off. They refused then to join the Confederacy during this time period. So this war plays a major role in future affairs when it comes to allies and warfare and so forth. They realized the United States had more power than they realized we had. In 1898, with the war against Spain and the Philippines, we win the battle at Manila Bay in 7 hours. We took Cuba in less than 6 weeks. So by World War I time period, they realized the United States is a fighting force. You don't want them involved in your wars because that they will make things happen real quickly. You know, they're not here to fiddle around with war. They want to have war and get it over with as quickly as possible. Okay? If you guys go to your chronology, you'll find most of these battles listed in order as they took place. I'm not going to ask you about the battles of this war, but if you want to, for your own interest, I've also written a lot of articles about this war. This in the lecture notes. So you might want to look at that also and just kind of review what's there here. Okay? February the 2nd, 1848. We have the Treaty of Guadalupe Geraldo. This is going to be the final decision to end this war. The man who oversees the agreement between the United States and Mexico is named Nicholas Trist, T-R-I-S-T, Nicholas Trist. President Polk sent him down here with one order: get as much land as possible. Get as much land as possible. Well, in this treaty, all he got was the northern part of Mexico. Most of it being desert. Okay? In this treaty, we agreed to pay Mexico $15 million in lawsuits to help take care of American lawsuits. So we ended up spending $15 million after all for all this territory and a war. We offered them $30 million to start off with, but they wouldn't take it. So after the war, we paid $15 million for this territory. All right, y'all kind of add this up. We spent $15 million for the Louisiana Purchase. We spent $5 million for Florida. We spent $15 million for the Southwest. That's $35 million we spent on Florida, the Southwest, and the Louisiana Purchase territory. Okay? In 1853, there'll be another land purchase, and this will take place in southern Arizona. We're surveying for the railroad to run from New Orleans to San Diego, the Southern Pacific Railroad. And down here below the Arizona border, the mountains get real low, a good place to put the railroad through. So John Gaston goes off down here and offers Mexico $10 million for the southern half or the southern part of Arizona, about 20,000 square miles. And they agreed to it. They knew if America came back in to take this Gaston Purchase land, that this time they'd take the whole country. And the whole country would go to the United States. So without even blinking an eye, they signed the agreement here, and the Gaston Purchase was purchased for $10 million. So the whole continent is going to cost us $45 million. That's a pretty good deal. That's a pretty good deal in this time period for all this land. Okay? Now, Mr. Polk was mad at Nicholas Trist for one reason. He says, number one, the land you brought back is the worst land there is. It's going to take lots of work to turn this wicked witch into a good territory to make money off of, to bring the American farmers in here. And number two, the people in Mexico will always think that this land is their land. There's going to be border problems in the future. You're taking the whole country away from them, we'd have solved the problem with border issues. And from now on, there'll be border issues between Mexico and the United States. And you're going to see this over and over again as people flood into California as migrant workers. And today we've got a wall they're trying to build across this area to keep people out. President Polk said, I wanted the whole territory to solve the problem in the future in this time period. Okay? So you guys look over the lecture notes that deals with the Mexican War. And you can go to Google and Google the maps up to see the maps of the war itself and how they went through and blockaded the West Coast and the East Coast, the Gulf Coast of Mexico, and how they brought the troops in from the north. They came down to Veracruz and came across from Veracruz, Mexico City. Very interesting war to look at here in this time period. Okay? Now, in the United States Senate is a young man whose name is David Wilmot. David Wilmot is from Pennsylvania. And David Wilmot is going to propose what is called the Wilmot Proviso. The Wilmot Proviso will outlaw slavery in the new territories taken from Mexico. David Wilmot says that slavery is going to end in Texas, and we're going to start a policy of containment to contain slavery and shrink it until it finally goes away. A policy of containment. All right, no more expansion of slavery past Texas. That's going to be problematic in itself by trying to keep that from having slavery out here in this part of the world here. David Wilmot is going to have to start two political parties. One is called the Liberty Party. The Liberty Party is totally against slavery, liberty and justice for all. The Liberty Party. The other party is called the Free Soil Party. The Free Soil Party says that no slaves shall go into the soils of the new territories. Okay? By the way, in this time period, you're going to see lots of little political parties evolving. The Whig Party is going to field a presidential candidate in 1849, and then they dissolve in 1854. They go away. When they go away, you're going to have the Liberty Party, the Free Soil Party, Constitutional Party, okay, the American Party, the Know Nothing Party, the Unionist Party. It's going to be crazy. And then the Republican Party shows up. Remember, George Washington told us we do not need political parties because they divide the American people. Now we're totally fractured. We are totally fractured by political parties. The two main parties will be Democrats and eventually Republicans. But all these little parties are in here too. And these little parties do split the votes from time to time. Okay? They do split the vote from time to time. The Independent Party kept George Herbert Walker Bush from a second term as president. Ross Perot ran and took the votes away from Mr. Bush, and Mr. Clinton won the election. That's not unheard of. In today's elections going on today, it happened to these candidates today. One could lose because a little third party comes up and gets 10 million votes, and it knocks a lot of people out of the vote here that would have been for the incumbent president. That's not unusual this to happen here in this time period. Okay, right behind all of this is going to come the California Gold Rush. We're going to get California in the nick of time. In 1849, a little miner out here at Sutter's Creek, outside of Sacramento, California, is going to find gold in the streams here coming out of the mountains. And the way he talks, you think that gold is spewing out the mountains here. It's a waterfall of gold. And all these teenagers and all these young adults across the country started fleeing for California. I pulled the 1850 federal census for Sacramento. I found brothers and cousins and friends and all this stuff from Alabama, Georgia, Carolinas, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Maine, all over the country heading to California. San Francisco had 1,800 people when we had the war out here. And 2 years later, they got 35,000 people in San Francisco. Within a year of winning this war against Mexico, California is ready for statehood. They got over 85,000 people who live out here. By 1850, it's ready for statehood. Utah is getting ready for statehood. People flood out here trying to get rich quick. And when the boys showed up, right behind them come the girls. And the California Gold Rush is nothing more than spring break. These kids do not get wealthy off the gold. It's going to take mining companies with lots of money and lots of tools to get into the hills to get the gold. These kids here just found the little remnants around. All they got out was a story to tell their grandkids. How they came to California to get rich and how they settled in here. Went to San Francisco and started businesses and all this kind of stuff. Okay? So California is going to boom because of the gold rush. That gold rush is what ended the Depression of 1837. The Depression that Mr. Jackson started will end here in 1850 with the California Gold Rush. Okay, it's a very important part of our history, is this California Gold Rush here in this time period. Well, not only did the American kids come up to the California Gold Rush, the kids from Peru and Chile and all of Mesoamerica, they came up. Canadian kids came down. Kids from Alaska came down. And a bunch of children, a bunch of teenagers and young adults from China come over. These Chinese kids cannot pay their way across the Pacific Ocean, so they get family sponsors in San Francisco and Portland and Seattle. And these families will pay their passage across the Pacific Ocean. And once they arrive here, they'll spend 5 years indentured to the white families. These white families in San Francisco normally pay these little Chinese people, these little Chinese kids, they pay them about $5 a week in salary. But they did the household chores. They fed them, they clothed them, they housed them, and give them $5 a week in spending money. And these kids are going to save their money. They'll spend $2 and put $3 away for the future. Now you take 5 years times 52 weeks in a year, all right, times $3. Okay? You have got about a year and a half or 2 years normal income for an American during this time period. And these kids took that money and they started their own businesses. They started their own food companies, their own restaurants, their own grocery stores. They started bread companies and bakeries. They're going to build bathhouses. Most people didn't have a bathroom in their house during this time period, and you had a bathhouse for the woman and for the man. The Chinese ladies took care of the women, and the Chinese men took care of the men. You go to the bathhouse, guys, if you're a young lady, you go to the bathhouse, you get your manicure done, you get your pedicure done, they give you a massage, they give you a good, nice hot bath. They'd go through and fix your hair for you. And when you came out of that place, you was like $1 million. You guys would go in, and they'd go through and cut your hair for you. They give you a nice, good, close shave. They put you into a soaking tub where you'll soak for a couple of hours. You might want to get a massage here. They have massages available if you want a massage here. And you left there feeling like $100. You were made over again. And a lot of people once a week, or at least once a month, would go to the bathhouse for a good, nice hot bath, a shave, and a haircut, and the whole 9 yards. So that's not a very bad deal, you know. You go to the barbershop now, you might get a shave. If you ask for a shave, I might give you a shave, but you're gonna get just be a haircut. And here you get the full treatment. They go through and clean your fingernails and the whole 9 yards, guys. They took good care of you here at these bathhouses. And they were coming good. And you find them across the country as time goes on. They become real popular. So these Chinese Americans who come over here in the 1840s, early 1850s, are going to make it. They're going to do real well for themselves. All right? They become competitive in the American economy. They get so competitive that by the 1880s, Congress wants to get rid of them. That's what it's called, the Chinese Exclusion Act, to send the people back to their home countries. Well, guys, these are the children of the grandparents. These are your grandchildren now, and they're Americans. They're not Chinese. So you're trying to bring immigration and white supremacy on people who have been here for several generations and who made quite well for themselves. But that white supremacy don't like anybody outdoing the white folks. So you see the same racism that African Americans are facing on the plantations in the Chinese areas of the West. You're seeing the same racism against Latino Americans, Hispanic Americans in the Southwest. You'll see the same racism toward the Jewish people who come in and start their own shops and businesses across the country during and after the American Civil War. So you see a lot of people who immigration laws and immigration rules and white supremacy are going to affect. It's going to be pretty much nationwide with various groups. Native Americans, Chinese Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, Black Americans, and the whole 9 yards. Okay? It's become a major part of all this stuff here. I got a book here at the house that's called The History of Asian Americans. It's a very good book. If you guys are from the Philippines, if you guys have family that came in from Korea or from China or from Thailand or any of these, Hawaii, any of these Pacific Rim countries, I would advise you to read it, to learn your history that took place. If you are Hispanic, Latino, you're from South Texas, or you're from Arizona or California, and your family speaks Spanish or have Spanish ancestry, I get the books that deal with Spanish American history. I have those too. So the more you read, the more you understand what's going on here in America. You know, they want to go through it nowadays and have the public's history. I'm like, you need to go through and start reading the people's history and not the public's history. And read about the people who come in here and how they build America, and don't do this old white supremacy, the people's history. It's going to be totally ridiculous. And I'm not going to teach it. I will not teach the people's history. I'm going to teach the history of America as the people who brought it to us. Our democracy does not come from one group. It takes all of us to create a democracy, not just one group, all right, or one religion. It takes all the people to do all this stuff, okay? All right, guys. It's also here in the late 1840s, the women get upset. The American women says it's been too long of us struggling, trying to get the vote. It is time the American women have the full citizenship as any of the Americans. And here they start what is called the women's rights movement. Here comes the women's rights movement. They're concerned because women do not have any kind of rights. They don't have the right to divorce. You decide to leave your husband, he keeps the house, the kids, and all your stuff. He throws the woman out. She has no ownings when she's married. If she has no brother or no sister or no family members to take care of her, she's in trouble. About to get choked here. A lot of women who have no place to go to will find themselves being employed in prostitution. A horrible way to go. Okay? So in 1848, the American women come together and call for a women's rights meeting. They're going to meet at Seneca Falls, New York. Seneca Falls, New York. The meeting takes place on 2 days, July the 19th and July the 20th, 1848. 300 women and several dozen progressive men will come to this meeting. And here they'll write a document called the Declaration of Sentiments. The Declaration of Sentiments. They're going to tell the white men what they want here in this time period. And they're tired of being discriminated against in this time period. Their leader is Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Liz Stanton is the leader of this group here in 1848. Now, here's what they want. They want full citizenship. They want the right to vote, the right to own property, the right to sue in courts. They want deposited divorce legislations where they can keep the house and the kids. They want the right to obtain professional careers. They want to become college professors and lawyers and doctors, insurance brokers, the whole 9 yards, bankers, the whole 9 yards. That's unheard of during this time period. You have very few women doctors during this time. You almost have no women lawyers during this time period. Okay? And they want the rights here. They want the right to own property. Well, one state in the Union allows women to own property if their husbands approve it. This state passed this law in 1839. In 1839, a state in the Union is going to pass a law that women can own property if their husbands approve of it. What state was it? Oh, you're going to say Massachusetts, you're going to say Pennsylvania with the Quakers, or New York. The state was Mississippi. Mississippi allowed women to own property if their husbands approved of it. It's the first state in which women had the right to own property. Okay? Now, at this meeting were 2 young ladies from South Carolina. These 2 ladies had grown up on a slave plantation and they hated slavery. They wrote about all the moans and groans of people being beaten because they didn't get their work quotas done for the day, how abusive their fathers were to the women in the slave quarters, how their brothers took advantage of the women in the slave quarters, and these ladies were fed up with it. When they turned 21 years of age, they left home and went to Pennsylvania. They joined a Quaker colony in Pennsylvania. And these 2 ladies become the big spokespersons for women's rights and for against slavery. They're known as the Grimke sisters, Grimke, the Grimke sisters, Angelina and Sarah Grimke. And they're going to travel the North giving speeches to civic groups and to men's groups about the evils of slavery. and how women need the right to vote, the right to full citizenship. So don't forget about the Grimke sisters, okay? In 1849 in Seneca Falls, New York, they had a scandal take place. Elizabeth Smith Miller, Liz Miller, is going to come to the meeting wearing Turkish trousers. Turkish trousers is what MC Hammer was wearing when he did the crab dance, and you can't touch this. If y'all have not seen that, that's on my videos for History 2 class. You guys, History 1 class, y'all go and type in MC Hammer can't touch and watch the video. And I'm sure y'all seen it before. Those are Turkish trousers. That's what genies wore, were Turkish trousers. And the men here in this time period accuse Liz Miller of being a cross-dresser. They accuse her of being a drag, wearing men's drag here at this meeting, at this time period. Okay? It's also in this time period we realize how bad slavery is and what's going on here. These ladies are going to have sponsored a woman who's been abused by her master. Her name is Cecilia. Cecilia lives in Maryland, and her owner, her master, regularly rapes her, beats her. Cecilia goes to court, seeking relief from her master. In 1855, Cecilia's case goes to the American Supreme Court. Roger Taney, the Supreme Court Chief Justice that Mr. Jackson put into power, makes the rulings towards Cecilia. It is what he says. Cecilia is property, and property cannot sue her master. So therefore, the master can do anything he wants to Cecilia, and she can't say a word about it. He's condoning the raping of a woman here, guys, in the Supreme Court. That it's law of the land because she's property. I'm telling you, Andrew Jackson has a long arm when it comes to Roger Taney. Supreme Court judges must be really investigated and really put over the coals, because you're going to have them for 30, 40, 50 years into the future. And we need Supreme Court judges who are not political. They're beholden to no party. When you become a Supreme Court Chief Justice, you're not Republican, you're not Democrat, you're not independent. You are Supreme Court judges who upholds the American law. And this business of putting up people, guys, because of political issues, of political standing in the future, that's malarkey. That's totally against what the founding fathers had planned for the American Supreme Court. So what John Marshall did not have planned for the Supreme Court here in this time period. And Roger Taney is going to make lots of bad decisions as Supreme Court judge, that's a justice that's going to lead to civil war. He's one of the culprits for this war. Okay? In 1848, we're up for a new election for the presidency. This time, Lewis Cass, a well-known senator from Michigan, is going to run for the presidency. Mr. Cass is going to run as a Democrat. Running against him is going to be Zachary Taylor, a Louisiana plantation owner, one of the generals who helped win the war in Mexico. Zachary Taylor has never voted in a national election in his whole life. He's never voted for a president his whole life, and he's running for the presidency. And he runs as a Whig. Zachary Taylor is going to run as a Whig here in this time period. The Free Soil Party is going to bring in old Martin Van Buren, the old guy that caused the Depression here in 1837, that old Jacksonian who was not changing his ways. And he brings with him for his vice president, Francis Adams. Now, why is this important? Francis Adams is the son of John Quincy Adams. In the election of 1832, Jackson's campaign manager was Martin Van Buren. He's the one who happened, or I should say in 1828, he's the one who called John Quincy's daddy a pimp in that election. And here they're running together on the same ticket. It just shows you that politics puts together strange bedfellows. That anybody can come together and join together in a political move here. In 1848, John Quincy Adams and Martin Van Buren and Francis Adams run for the presidency as a free soil candidates. Mr. Zachary Taylor is going to choose Mr. Millard Fillmore to run with him, and the two men have never met each other. They don't even know each other. This is a real crazy election here in 1848. And of course, the Whig Party wins. The Whig Party wins because of Zachary Taylor's military background. Zachary Taylor is your last slave-owning president who sits in the presidency. He's the last president who owned slaves while sitting in the presidency. He's the last one. Okay? Zachary Taylor's got a large plantation just north of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Got over 100 slaves. And Zachary Taylor realizes at this time period that slavery is a major issue. And being a slave owner, he says, I wish that Congress would find a solution about slavery. He says it's time for Congress to decide if we should or should not have slaves. And he says, however they vote, I'll sign off on it. Zachary Taylor really secretly wanted slavery to end. He says it's old-fashioned, it's time to do away with it, and now's the time for it to go. So if Congress had voted here in 1850 to do away with slavery, Zachary Taylor would have voted on it. He had voted for it. Okay? So Zachary Taylor's an interesting man to look at here in this time period. All right? All right. In 1850, here comes trouble. The trouble comes out of California. In 1850, California is ready to apply for statehood. At the same time, Utah is ready to apply for statehood. You got two free states that want to enter the Union. David Wilmot and Democrats are totally convinced there'll be no more, I should say the Whigs, there'll be no more slave states. They could have taken Texas and divided Texas into 3 states, but Texas would not hear of it. They would not hear of it. And according to the Wilmot Proviso, there'll be no more slave states. So they decided this. They decided that since Utah was founded by Mormons, they used their faith and their theology against them. A lot of senators said if Utah enters the Union as a state, polygamy will come to the country, and that men can have more than one wife. Well, guys, that was just a very fundamental belief of the Mormons, which is not really that bigly enforced. Very few of these men had more than one wife. Polygamy was not an issue. It's just an excuse to get rid of Utah. And Utah was denied. You don't see Utah enter the Union until around 1896 is when Utah finally enters the Union. So Utah is denied statehood. They remain a territory. But California has gold. We want that gold. But how do you make the South happy if you bring in California as a free state and there's nothing about a slave state? And they hatched up the most idiotic idea in American history. Congress can do some stupid things sometimes. And here's what they did. A lot of Southerners were concerned because slaves in Missouri and slaves in Kentucky and slaves in Maryland and Virginia were escaping slavery and going up north. Northern states allowed them to be free people in the North, and the Southerners did not like this. So they passed a law called the Fugitive Slave Act. It says that if Southern slaves go into Northern states for freedom, the United States military shall go into those states and collect up those slaves and bring them back to the South and have them re-enslaved again. If you're going to be a runaway slave, you better go to Canada. Because otherwise, they're going to come and get you, like Solomon Northup and Thomas Sims, and try to bring you back into slavery. This is where Harriet Beecher Stowe's book came out of, Uncle Tom's Cabin. Okay? During Franklin Pierce's administration as president, over 300 people escaped slavery, went north, and the United States Army recaptured them and brought them back to the slave plantation. If you're a runaway slave and you're brought back to the plantation, they tie you to the ground totally naked. They put out these wooden stakes and they tie your arms and your legs to them. They tie your feet and your hands to these stakes, and they whip you with a whip, with a bull whip. They'll stand between your legs and whip you up and down your back. And then they'll come to the side, the left side and the right side, whipping you crossways. They tear your back of your legs up, they tear your buttocks up, they tear your back up. And then they put salt or black pepper in those wounds to make you suffer more. You run away a second time and brought back, you get 500 lashes. You probably won't survive it. And your back is torn up. Run away a third time. They take you to the chopping block where they kill chickens. They put your foot on the chopping block and they cut your toes off on both feet. They chop your toes off. You cannot run anymore. You can hobble, but you cannot run. You want to interfere with your field work, but you cannot run anymore. Y'all watch that Unchained Memories for HBO films. I mentioned before in this lecture series. You get an idea what it's like here in this time period. Okay? You don't understand what happened in the past, you can easily relive it. You'll have people that go through and try to turn the clock backwards the way it used to be because people don't know their history. You've got to be diligent towards your history. Do not let anybody take it away from you, and don't let anybody go through and try to turn the clock backwards and bring back all this evil stuff that took place in the past. Okay? Well, another problem here in 1850, oh, by the way, they brought in California as a free state in exchange for the Fugitive Slave Act. Fugitive Slave Act allowed California to come in as a free state. Okay? Over in Texas, people had spread out all over the countryside with their slaves. They had gone into New Mexico, into the areas up toward Utah. They've been out toward Colorado. They took slaves all over the place out here in the West against the law. And so they passed a ruling that these people must go back into the state of Texas or either give up their slaves. But they also redrew Texas. The Panhandle and the Peninsula or the Panhandle out toward El Paso were put onto the state of Texas. The Panhandle, which goes northward up toward Lubbock, and the little Panhandle out toward El Paso was added to the state of Texas. And anybody who lived above the Panhandle or west of El Paso either had to come back into Texas with their slaves or free their slaves. Once you built a homestead and started farming out here, you didn't want to give it up. So a lot of these slaves across this border were freed during this time period. They did free the slaves. Okay? Another situation in this time period deals with the city of Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. had a large slave market located 3 blocks from the nation's capital. And each year they sold over 10,000 people at this slave market. I want you guys to realize something. Washington, D.C. is a slave town. Slavery is alive here, guys. It's going to be alive here until 1866 when slavery is finally ended. A lot of these senators, a lot of these congressional members from the North came into this city and purchased slaves. In their household were slaves in which they called servants, but they owned them. So you got your congressional members from the North who are living this double life here in Washington, D.C. At home, they're against slavery, but here in Washington, D.C., they have their household servants in which they purchased. And it's crazy. And a lot of folks said it's time to close up the slave market in Washington, D.C. In 1850's compromise, they did this. They closed the slave market, saying there are plenty of slave markets in Virginia and Maryland. We do not need one in the nation's capital. So that one was closed up. And then the final issue of Commerce of 1850 involves federal building contracts. We're always building courthouses and federal courthouses and post offices and all this stuff. And these were all done by federal contract. Most of your contractors who got these federal contracts were Southerners. These Southerners were getting these contracts because they used slave labor in building these federal buildings. And Congress passes a law that says that Southern contractors cannot use slave labor on federal contracts. They have got to hire people and pay them a wage. It makes it more competitive with the Northern contractors who are complaining because they weren't getting federal contracts. The South kept underbidding them because they didn't use paid labor. The South was using free slave labor. So guys, in 1850, you got a major problem here. It's all coming to a head. The California issue, the Utah issue, the Texas issue, runaway slaves, and the Fugitive Slave Act, and now federal contracts here. Zachary Taylor sees lots of problems everywhere he turns. July the 4th, 1850. The president spent the day eating and drinking. He had all kinds of peach brandy. He ate cherries. He had a big old time on the 4th of July. The next morning, July the 5th, he's sick. His stomach is killing him. He's got bad indigestion. He's been throwing up. He's throwing up blood. He gets desperately sick by the 10th of July. And on the 11th, he dies. A lot of folks said that Zachary Taylor was poisoned over the Compromise of 1850. They believe that some Southern Democrats have come in there and poisoned this president who's a Whig. Well, we don't do autopsies during this time period, and we buried Zachary Taylor. In 1991, or 1992, we exhumed the body of Mr. Taylor and had an autopsy performed with DNA. Zachary Taylor died from cholera. All that acid he ate on the 4th of July made his ulcers in his stomach to erupt, and he started bleeding. That's what killed him. By the way, his body was pretty well preserved. It's surprised how well preserved his body was from being embalmed in 1850. He's still in pretty good shape. He was able to determine his ailment here. By the way, they did DNA on him. When I did my DNA back in 2012, I am kin to a bunch of presidents, including Zachary Taylor, because they did DNA on him. They had his DNA, and mine lined up with his. I'm kin to George Washington. I'm kin to Thomas Jefferson, and I'm kin to James Monroe and James Madison, and I'm kin to Zachary Taylor. I'm kin to Woodrow Wilson. I'm kin to a lot of the presidents. I'm also kin to Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. So y'all do those DNA tests. They're going to give you people that you were kin to in the past, that your DNA has got markers from them. So y'all should be ready for it. And you wonder why I teach history. It's in my genes. It's my DNA. All right, guys, Zachary Taylor died. Zachary Taylor told Congress, whatever you decide on slavery, I will agree to it. If you want to end slavery, I'll sign off on it. If you want to keep slavery, I'll sign off on it. But I really think it's time for us to end slavery in America. Here comes your number 13 president. Number 13, of course, was Millard Fillmore. And Millard Fillmore says this: I don't care about this Compromise of 1850. Don't even worry with it. We'll leave things the way it is. There's no point doing anything to change it. So guys, we lost our opportunity in this time period. Okay? I forgot to mention a while ago about the Underground Railroad. This is part of the Fugitive Slave Act. The Underground Railroad was a group of people who got together to form a network to get people out of slavery. They had come in the evening time, in the night, and asked people who want to be free to come with them. And it's been all night long traveling. They hid out during the daytime, and the night started traveling again. And of course, the old masters would send out slave catchers with bloodhounds trying to recapture these people. Once they crossed the Ohio River, they felt pretty safe until the Fugitive Slave Act. Now they got to go all the way across Ohio and into Michigan and make their way into Canada to finally find freedom here from slavery. And one of your big leaders here was named Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman was a leader of the Underground Railroad, and she's well known for helping people get out of slavery. So y'all remember Harriet Tubman. I got a complete article on her in your lecture notes that you can read through and read about the Fugitive Slave Act, read about Thomas Sims, the man who ran away to Boston. The federal troops came into Boston to arrest Mr. Sims, and the people of Boston hid him. One of the ministers there in Boston sent a letter to his slave owner and paid some $10,000 for the freedom of Mr. Sims. So you start seeing all this resistance here in this time period. You had David Walker, who lived in Boston. David Walker was a free man of color. And David Walker told the American people in the late 1820s, if the American slaves, if the African Americans must win their freedom through war, it's going to be woeful times for the American people. It'll be woeful times for the American people. And remember, they preached Moses during this time period. And how did Moses get the children of Israel out of Egypt? It took the 10 plagues to do it. You had the frogs who came on shore and died and stunk. You had the water that turned to blood. You had the flies. You had all these awful plagues that took place. And the last plague was the death of the firstborn son. The Israelis marked their houses with lamb's blood so the death angel would not come in their houses. But all the Egyptians lost their firstborn sons, including King Ramses, Pharaoh Ramses of the Egyptians. And David Walker says, woeful times is going to come if we must win our freedom through war. The death angel is going to come to America from 1861 to 1865. The death angel is going to take out 620,000 American boys. Between 1619 and 1808, when America ended this African slave trade, we brought 620,000 people from Africa. The same number died in the American Civil War. The death angel is coming. David Walker tells us to be mindful of this. And then you got Frederick Douglass here trying to find a way to make free blacks in the North equal to join the military. This is all happening during this time period. Okay? Millard Fillmore is number 13. Nobody really understands Will Millard Fillmore. He is from Buffalo, New York. He didn't do anything as president. When he leaves the presidency, when he wants to run for his own term, nobody wants him. The Whigs reject him, so does the Democrats. Nobody wants him. He's a man of no party. So in 1852, it's going to be a whole new group running for the presidency. The first man who runs for the presidency will be Winfield Scott. General Winfield Scott is going to run on the Free Soil Party. General Winfield Scott runs on the Free Soil Party. Okay? John P. Hale is going to run for the presidency. And Franklin Pierce is going to run on the Democrats. I just told y'all wrong on this. Mr. Franklin Pierce is going to be a Democrat. Winfield Scott is a Whig. And John Hale is a Free Soiler. So the Free Soil Party is going to run Mr. John Hale, a senator from New Hampshire. The Democrats are going to run the senator from New Hampshire, whose name is Franklin Pierce. So both senators are running against each other in this presidential election. And then the Whig Party is going to run Winfield Scott. Winfield Scott's the last candidate that the Whig Party is going to run. All right, they're going to soon be displaced by the Republican Party that will be established by people like Abraham Lincoln. All right, Franklin Pierce and Democrats win this election. Okay, now here's the sad story behind Mr. Franklin Pierce. Franklin Pierce was known as Handsome Frank. Everybody say he's a very good-looking man. Everybody liked to enjoy being around Franklin Pierce. He's a party boy. He's a frat boy, in other words. And he realized in politics he had spent lots of times in bars. And Franklin Pierce becomes alcoholic. Okay? When the election takes place here, when I say before the inauguration takes, or before the convention takes place, the Democratic convention, Mr. Pierce is not really being considered. But he puts his name out there, and it takes 3 votes before Mr. Pierce is selected by the Democrats to run for the presidency. He's not the first choice. Okay? But he does get it. Him and his wife, Jane, had 4 children. 3 children had died in infancy. One little boy lived. He's 11 years old, and his name is Benny, little Benny Pierce. And they love little Ben to death. Well, guys, after the election took place in November, and they try to get themselves ready for the presidential years, try to get things prepared here, selecting cabinet members and all this kind of stuff, the Pierce family is going to go by train in late February from New Hampshire, where they live, down to New York City for the big inaugural balls. And on the way down, their train derails. Little Benny is tossed from his seat, and his head is going to hit the overhead bin, which is made out of metal. And his skull cap is totally removed from his body. His brain is exposed. The little boy's body begins to convulse. He starts kicking and shaking. And Franklin just simply throws his cloak over little Benny. He does not want Jane to see him die. This little boy dies. Jane is convinced that God took her baby so Franklin would have no trouble from any children and making decisions to keep America out of war. She believed that God had taken Benny to help Franklin. About 6 months into the presidency, she realized that Franklin had sold his soul to the devil to become the president. And she is convinced that God took her baby to punish Franklin. And their marriage begins to fall apart. About a year after the presidency, Jane dies. Franklin becomes a recluse. They said that people would bring him bottles of liquor, and he sat in the house all day, didn't talk to anybody or see anybody, and drunk. He literally drunk himself to death. One of the most saddest presidents is that of Franklin Pierce. Okay? Franklin Pierce got a nemesis that's going to give him all kinds of problems while in the White House. His name is Stephen Douglas. Stephen Douglas is a senator from Illinois. And Stephen Douglas wants Mr. Pierce to be heavily involved in making the Western frontiers ready for slavery. During this time, Mr. Douglas begins debating with another senator from Illinois whose name is Abraham Lincoln. And in the debates, Abraham Lincoln is against slavery, and Mr. Douglas is for slavery. And all this debating gets put in the newspapers, both North and South. And the Southern people by 1859 time period are convinced that Abraham Lincoln would be a danger to Southern slavery. To do anything to keep Abraham Lincoln out of the presidency. He could be a threat to slavery. Mr. Douglas also told Congress it is time for what is known as popular sovereignty. Let the Western territories vote if they do or do not want slavery. Don't let Congress go and say you cannot have slavery out there. You need to vote if the states do or do not want slavery. And that popular vote makes a decision. You see, guys, if Mr. Millard Fillmore had made a decision back here about slavery with Congress, this stuff would not have happened. And now we're telling people that you have the right to vote for slavery in your territories. Out here in Kansas, they're getting ready for statehood, and they start fighting over and against slavery. You have the anti-slavery, and you have the pro-slavers. And you have what breaks out is what is called Bleeding Kansas. They make war over the issue of slavery. And we realize that the slavery issue is going to lead to a civil war. It's going to lead to a civil war. That popular sovereignty will not work. Stephen Douglas is also for the Kansas-Nebraska bill. This bill is going to allow for popular sovereignty, but it also allows for surveying of the railroads across the country. And here comes George Catlin trying to protect the Indian folks out here from having their land destroyed, taken away from them by the railroad companies. And of course, Native Americans are going to eventually lose. They'll be forced to reservations. They're going to kill off the buffalo herds. And the Native American way of life is going to disappear across the nation. It's going to be a major disaster when all this takes place. Okay. Franklin Pierce was a hero in the Mexican War. He was a general out here. His best buddy was named Jefferson Davis. Jefferson Davis is a senator from Mississippi. Jefferson Davis is also the son-in-law of Zachary Taylor. Davis had met and married his daughter. And on their honeymoon, he brought her down to Biloxi to his home on the Gulf Coast. And while in Biloxi, they both are going to get smallpox. I mean, they're going to get yellow fever. They both are going to get yellow fever. And she dies. Davis survives. He remarries. His new wife is named Verena, and they'll have 3 sons. All right. Jefferson Davis becomes Mr. Pierce's Secretary of War. The head of the War Department is going to be Jefferson Davis. Both men had served as generals in the Mexican War. Jefferson Davis went to school at West Point Academy. Jefferson Davis is going to rebuild West Point Academy. New curriculum, new professors, and a new head of West Point. The new head is going to be Robert E. Lee. All right. Then he's going to rebuild the way we fight. The first thing he brings in is going to be trench warfare. The warfare of Andrew Jackson in New Orleans, the warfare of Mr. Sam Houston and down below Houston, Texas, the Creek Indian War at Horseshoe Bend. And he believes that trench warfare is the way to have modern wars, to mark off the battle lines by using trenches. Trench warfare is going to go to World War I. By the way, everything he builds here in this time period, you're going to see improved and modernized by World War I. Trench warfare is the first thing he brings in. Then he brings in what is called the coffee grinder machine gun. It takes 3 men to operate this machine gun. You have a belt full of bullets. You feed the bullets into the machine gun, and a guy on this side is going to pull the bullets through the gun, while the guy in the middle cranks a crank that shoots the bullets. The guy on this side is going to feed them into the end and pull them through so the whole machine works. So you have one guy feeding, one guy pulling, and one guy cranking. All right. This machine gun is going to turn into the Gatling gun. By 1870, 1880, the buffalo hunters who killed the buffaloes in the Great Plains will use the Gatling guns. By 1910, it turns into the Tommy gun, which will be used all during World War I and be used in the 1920s with all the gangsters. It'll go into World War II. My dad told me the gun of choice when they went across after D-Day was a Gatling gun, or I should say the Tommy gun. That's what they used here going across Europe, trying to run down Hitler. They used the old machine gun here in this time period. Okay, it's a gun of choice here, the Tommy gun. Okay, he also brought in what is called the hand grenades. They took little thin cylinders, round cylinders, they put black powder in them, and they filled them full of bolts and glass and nails and so forth. They put a short wick on it. You lit the wick, you threw it across the enemy lines, and it'd blow up. And all this shrapnel would injure these men across the way, if not kill them. They brought in the landmine. You stepped on it, it'd blow your leg off. That's part of your new artillery. They brought in the 6-shooter, the Samuel Colt 6-shooter. And then they brought in the Sharps repeating rifles. You cocked it, you fired. You cocked it, you fired. You cocked it a third time, you fired, then you reloaded your shells back into the repeating rifle. Okay. They also brought in the grooved barrel musket, the musket rifle with a grooved barrel inside of it. The grooved barrel made the bullets accurate up to 1,000 feet. And the rifle used a French bullet that was called the mini ball. 90% of the boys who died in the Civil War died from gunshot wounds. Before the war, America didn't have a whole lot of guns. You didn't see a whole lot of homicides with guns before the war. After the war, we're the killing fields. Go out west. Go to your large cities. The suicide rate increased. Gang warfare started using guns across the country. Guns got so bad in the 1870s that soldiers from both sides, Confederate soldiers and Union soldiers, got together and formed what is called the NRA to stop the violence with guns. The NRA started sponsoring shooting contests to give away prizes and try to get the guns off the streets in America. The NRA's kind of changed their position since that time period. Okay? So, guys, guns become a major problem because of Jefferson Davis. He brought in the ironclads. Old Strebe went through and covered his hippopotamus with iron to knock out those stumps and those deadheads in the rivers. Well, they said, we can do that. We can go through and cover all of our boats with iron, and they won't sink. And here comes your ironclads, which will eventually turn into your all-steel Navy by the 1880s and early 1890s. You'll start seeing the steel Navy evolve from all of this stuff here in this time period. Okay, here comes precision artillery. Artillery will be accurate up to 200 yards. I'm sorry, up to 2,000 yards. I should say feet, 2,000 feet. All right, about a half a mile is accurate. Okay, so they're going to bring in the balloons, the hot air balloons, to observe the battlefields. And of course, the first thing they start doing is trying to shoot down that balloon. Those balloons learn to get tablecloths with them and tie the four corners together and use them as parachutes. You'll start seeing that being used as new technology as time goes on. So, guys, what I'm telling you is this. Jefferson Davis is going to create the modern American Army between 1853 and 1857. He builds a modern American military. This military is going to go to Europe and be used in World War I. It is built to last. It is built for industrialized killing. 4 years after inventing this new military, Jefferson Davis becomes the president of the Confederacy. And he's got to fight the machine that he built. The war machine that he built will be used by the Union Army, and the Southern Army does not have it. They do not have it. Okay? Now, also in the 1850s comes a new sense of nationalism. A lot of people are scared of immigration during this time period. They believe immigration is going to ruin the country, and so they won't limit on immigration. These people who are totally against immigration coming to America, these new immigrants coming to America, are going to be your white nativists, not Native Americans, but native white Americans. They're the ones who are against this immigration policy. The immigration stopped. No more Catholics, no more Irishmen, nobody else can come into the country. The country is totally closed off to immigration. They're afraid that if enough Catholics come to America, the Pope will come with them. They have all kinds of fears here, guys, and anxieties during this time period. Okay? A lot of stuff is happening here in this time period. All right? These folks will call themselves the Know Nothing Party. The Know Nothing Party is a nativist party that is totally against immigration laws. New immigrants come into the country during this time period. Okay? So y'all remember this one here. The Taylor family in the late 1840s destroyed Ireland. Germany had all kinds of upheaval. They're trying to go to democracy in the kingdoms. The Pope and the church comes in, they put down the rebellions up here. The people who lost come to America. And they don't want these people coming to America. They're just scared of the Catholics from Germany and the Catholics from Ireland during this time period. Okay? It's also, guys, in around 1855, 1856, a new political party begins to get its footing. This new party is called the Republican Party. One of your leaders will be Senator Abraham Lincoln from Illinois. All right? They're going to bring into their fold Whigs, Liberty Party people, American Party people, the Union Party people, the Free Soil people. Even the Know Nothing Party is going to join in the Republican Party. So people are going to find a new way here of ruling with themselves with this new party called the Republican Party. Okay, here is what they want. The Republican Party wants stronger protective tariffs. Stronger protective tariffs to bring more money into the federal government. Okay? They want to expand and rebuild the American infrastructure. It's been a long time since America spent money on roads, on the infrastructure. That's how it is in America today. We're not spending any money on roads in America since the 1980s. That's been 30 years ago. It's been 40 years ago in some cases. And we have the old bridges that are crumbling. We have our roads are torn up. And it is time for us to rebuild America. That's what they did here. We're going to rebuild our infrastructure, build new harbors, new docks, build better roads, build new railroads, expand the telegraph system across the country. Okay? They want cheap land for the Western farmers. They want cheap land for the Western farmers. They want a strong central federal government. A strong central federal government. They want a national banking system. Now, President Polk brought in the Treasury Department, but they want to add to it with the banking system. Okay? And they want to see slavery contained to where it is. No more expansion of slavery. They don't want to kill slavery, people. They want to limit it where it is. The policy of containment. Try to contain as much as possible here in this time period. Well, guys, there's a lot of passion in all this stuff. There's a lot of trouble happening here. On May the 19th, 1856, it is going to come to the Senate. Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts is going to make a speech against the American South. He's going to criticize South Carolina in particular. The man he talks bad about is named Mr. Butler, Senator Butler from South Carolina. Mr. Sumner is the same gentleman who told the Americans earlier on that America has two evil masters. We have the masters of the looms and we have the masters of the lash, and both masters are evil. And Mr. Sumner really criticizes the American South and their policies and their politics, in South Carolina in particular. One of your House members in South Carolina was named Congressman Butler. Mr. Butler. His name, Mr. Butler. Mr. Butler is the one that Mr. Sumner talked bad about. His nephew was named Preston Brooks. And Preston Brooks got mad because Senator Butler could not be at the meeting because he'd been ill, he'd been sick. So Preston Brooks took it on himself to go and correct Mr. Sumner. And the correction is going to involve a walking stick. Preston Brooks walked over to the senatorial chambers once he heard about Mr. Sumner's remarks about South Carolina, and he hit the man across his back with that walking stick. Now, Charles Sumner is not a very big gentleman. Mr. Brooks is a pretty good-sized man. And he hit Mr. Sumner several times across the back of that walking stick. Mr. Sumner finally got under the desk where Mr. Brooks started poking him with his walking stick. It took several men to pull Preston Brooks off of Charles Sumner. Charles Sumner is going to inflict some major wounds to Mr. Sumner. It'll take Mr. Sumner several months to recover from his wounds. And Preston Brooks is going to get the American South into trouble. Mr. Sumner said this: if the American South should ever secede from the Union, I'll make sure they'll pay and pay dearly to re-enter the Union. During the war, Preston Brooks joins a new group of Republicans who call themselves the Radicals. The Radical Republicans wants to punish the South for the Civil War. And Mr. Sumner is going to get his wish. He'll make Reconstruction so hard on the South to punish him for causing this war. Okay? So the South did no favors when Preston Brooks beat up Charles Sumner, because Charles Sumner going to get the last word when it's all said and done in this time period. I need to turn a light on here. It's getting kind of dark in here. Y'all hold on for a second. That might be a little bit better. You actually kind of see better now. Okay? Franklin Pierce only served one term as president. He served that one term. That's all he served here in this time period. Okay, in 1856, we have election for the new presidency. The man who runs for the Republican Party is going to be John Fremont. Now, I told you how Republicans were anti-Catholic with the Free Soil Party. Mr. Fremont's a Catholic. He's the first Catholic who runs for the presidency. All right, we're going to have 4 Catholics who run for the presidency. You'll have Fremont first. Okay, he does not win. You'll have Alfred Smith in 1928. He does not win. Then you'll have John Kennedy who'll run in 1960, and he'll win the presidency. The next one I know that is a Catholic is going to be Mr. Kerry, John Kerry. He's a Catholic. And of course, Mr. Biden's a Catholic. So there's going to be 5 people who's Catholic who run for the presidency over all these years. A lot of people were scared of Catholic presidents, by the way. That's why Alfred Smith didn't make it in 1928. The Ku Klux Klan had a lot of power in the late 1920s, and they were totally anti-Catholic. And so the Ku Klux Klan made a big appeal not to vote for Alfred Smith in that election during that time period. Okay? So you have John C. Fremont, a Catholic who runs for the presidency. He's also a war general from Mexican War. The Democrats are going to choose Mr. James Buchanan. Mr. Buchanan is a senator from Pennsylvania. He's also been a foreign minister. He's been the minister to England for several years here. The American Know Nothing Party is going to choose Millard Fillmore, the man they would not run when Franklin Pierce runs, and here he is again trying to run for the presidency, this time as the American Know Nothing Party candidate. That's Mr. Fillmore. Well, Mr. Buchanan wins the election. Mr. Buchanan says that he is going to let the Congress decide on slavery. That's not his concern. It's the American people's concern. Let the people decide if they do not want slavery. You know what they should have done is put a vote out during this time period for or against slavery. That would solve the problem. Of course, the American South was probably still seceded and cause the war, because there's no other way out of it by this time. We've gone too far. It's like General Howe telling George Washington to surrender, and we'll just call the whole thing off. Washington says, y'all gone too far. You should have stopped about 10 years ago, and you didn't do it. Now you have the price to pay for it. Okay? Now, what's interesting about James Buchanan is this. James Buchanan is gay. He's your gay president. Mr. Buchanan had a longtime partner whose name was Rufus King. Rufus King and Mr. James Buchanan were partners who lived together in the same household for 16 years. The polite company at Washington, D.C. called them the Buchanans. They called Mr. King his wife. Rufus King was also the vice president for the vice president for Mr. Franklin Pierce. But Mr. King never served because Mr. King came down with tuberculosis, went to Cuba to recover, and died down in Cuba. Buchanan had gone with him. Rufus King was from Alabama, and they traveled across Alabama together. So these 2 gay men were together companions here in this time period, and people pretty much knew about them. Okay? And I found a lot of gay men in Washington, D.C. during this time period. Alexander Stephens, the vice president of the Confederacy, was also a gay man in this time period. And they called them the Miss Nancys in this period of time. If you was a Miss Nancy, you were a gay guy, or they called you a dandy. Either one would associate you with being a homosexual in this time period. So James Buchanan is your first gay president. They said that when Rufus King died, that Buchanan had a hard time dealing with it. the man really grieved the loss of his partner in this time period. Okay, so Mr. Buchanan is going to be your first gay president. The first lady will be his niece. And for the first time, the lady in the White House is called the First Lady. The First Lady's term is going to come with Mr. Buchanan and his niece as his White House hostess of this time period. All right? Mr. Buchanan has lots of problem with sectionalism in this time period. The sections are at war with each other in this time period. Congress would not act on very important social issues, and so therefore the Supreme Court stepped in. I want to tell you guys, whenever the Congress, the Senate, the House, the President cannot make decisions like health care and gay marriages, where's it go to? It goes to the Supreme Court for final decision. They couldn't decide on abortions and then in 1973. And Roe versus Wade goes to the Supreme Court. Okay? Whenever the House and the Senate and the President cannot make decisions on social issues, it goes to the Supreme Court. And of course, what happens here, guys, in 1857, here comes the Dred Scott case. John Emerson is the owner of Dred Scott. Emerson was 4 years old, and Scott was 3 years old when Scott became his property. Mr. Emerson decides to go to West Point Academy in New York State, where freedom, that there's no slavery, but Dred Scott, being his property, went with him as a slave. Then Emerson goes to medical school in Philadelphia, becomes a physician for the United States Army, and then serves in both free territories and slave territories, while Mr. Dred Scott goes with him. Emerson goes to all these New York posts, and Dred Scott goes with him. In Wisconsin, Mr. Scott meets a young lady who's enslaved to another Army officer. Mr. Emerson buys her and gives her to Dred Scott as his wife. He owns both his wife and Dred Scott. They in turn have a baby in free country, in free territory. In 1845, Emerson retires from the Army, goes back home to Missouri, where he dies, and Dred Scott, the wife and the baby, is given to another family member as property. At least they give them together. They could have broken them apart. And here Dred Scott sues for his freedom. In 1857, the Dred Scott case is going to go to the Supreme Court. Roger Taney, the Supreme Court Chief Justice that Andrew Jackson put into power, is going to write the final decision of Dred Scott. Here's what he says. Dred Scott, being property, cannot sue his master. Property cannot sue its master. And being a Black American, being an African American, Dred Scott had no voice in the American court system. He is saying, guys, that Black Americans have no voice in the court system. It's only for white folks. And so therefore he rules against Dred Scott. And then Taney declares that slavery is the law of the land. Congress had its chance to make its voice heard. The presidents had their chance. Now the Supreme Court makes the final decision. And when the Supreme Court says that slavery is the law of the land, the people of the North are horrified. They can't believe it. The people of the South rejoice. The problem is solved forever. Our slavery will never come to an end. We'll always have our slaves. Okay? This is in May of 1857. A few months later in August, a little brokerage firm based in Ohio is going to declare for bankruptcy. And by declaring for bankruptcy, this news is going to hit Wall Street through the telegraph. The news media is going to cause a depression because a little brokerage firm went busted in Ohio, and they think the whole country is going busted. And the American people went to their banks, withdrew their money, and here comes the panic of 1857. It's only been 7 years since the other depression had ended, and here we are in another depression. At the same time, England quit buying Southern cotton. The Southern cotton producers had produced so much cotton in the late 1850s that England had warehouses that were filled with cotton. They had no need for cotton. For 18 months, the cotton market in the South was a dead duck. The merchant system up north was dead during this depression. And then finally, in late 1859, England needed cotton. And the cotton price across the South went to an all-time high. And the American South began to tell the American people that industrialization is what causes depressions. If we stay agrarian, we'll have no depressions, because the South came out of this depression in 1859. Okay, it's a false promise here, guys. Then in October of 1859, here comes John Brown out of Kansas. John Brown was one of the anti-slavery guys that was based over here in Kansas. He was part of that Bleeding Kansas War that took place in 1856 over popular sovereignty. John Brown decided to come to Virginia, break into the arsenal at Harper's Ferry, steal weapons and ammo, go to plantations and outfit the slave men with weapons to start a war against their old masters. And a lot of these slaves would not agree to what John Brown wanted to do. John Brown is planning a slave uprising in which the slaves will fight their masters in a revolution to end slavery. Well, the militia is called in out here, and John Brown is arrested. And him and some 26 men are going to be hung for their crimes in Charlottesville, Virginia. Abraham Lincoln says that John Brown was grievous of all crimes. He says American individuals do not make American policy. It's not their job to go through and try to solve social issues. That's why you have Congress, that the people vote on the congressional members, and they're the ones who make the decision for the people. That individuals should not take the law into their own hands. Okay? And John Brown is hung for his crime here, trying to stage this slave uprising here in this time period. Okay? The American South could not believe a man like John Brown would do such a thing, while the people in the North celebrated the life of John Brown. And you're starting to see the difference between North and South already happening in this time period. It is breaking down and breaking down and breaking down. Buchanan decides not to run for re-election. His vice president, John Breakingham, decides that he will run for election for the presidency during this time period. And John Breckinridge does run for the presidency in this time period. John Hood decides to run for the presidency in this time period. You have Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas who decide to run for the presidency during this time period. Okay, Stephen Douglas is running for a Democrat along with Breckinridge, the vice president of Mr. Buchanan. John Hood, who runs here in this time, or John Bale, who runs during this time period, is going to run as an independent. He's going to run as a Unionist Party member. Mr. Lincoln is going to run as a Republican. And Lincoln has got two guys who are hot on his heels, Samuel Northrop and William Seward. And these three men are a three-way horse race trying to get the Republican nomination. And these three men are enemies of each other. Mr. Solomon Northrop is really good with financing. Solomon Chase, Solomon Chase is really good at financing. William Seward is real good at legal and international affairs. Mr. Lincoln is seen as just being just a regular old politician. Nothing special about him, just being a bipartisan politician in this time period. Okay? In the convention of 1860, after 3 votes, Mr. Lincoln wins the nod to run as a Republican candidate. He decides to take his 2 political enemies and give them high office. He's going to make William Seward Secretary of State and Solomon Chase in charge of the Treasury Department. And these three men become best buddies of each other. When Rogers Ney finally dies in 1856, the new Supreme Court Chief Justice is going to be Solomon Chase. Pretty good decision here to make Solomon Chase here this position after the war had broken out. Okay? So, guys, Mr. Lincoln is going to run as a Republican, and he's going to choose these two competitors to be his cabinet members. Okay? Mr. Breckinridge and Mr. Douglas comes down to Charleston, South Carolina for the Democratic Convention, and here they start fighting over politics, over slavery. And the great Democratic Party is going to split. That's the last stronghold here that's holding the country together. Education, religion, politics, and the economy are the four major binders that keeps the country together. The economy has split over slavery. The churches have split over slavery. Okay? Education was split over slavery. And the only thing left was politics. And it splits here in 1859, or 1860, I should say, at this convention here in Charleston. When the Democratic Party splits, we're on the way to war. We're on the way to war. Mr. Douglas is going to run for the Democratic Party in the northern states only. Mr. Breckinridge is going to run for the Democratic Party in the South only. They split the vote, and that puts Abraham Lincoln into the presidency. From the 1st of November until March the 4th, 1861, the president is still Buchanan. In December, the Electoral College has certified that Mr. Lincoln is the winner of the election. The people of South Carolina begin a convention to secede from the Union. The governor of South Carolina contacts the governor of Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida, and Georgia, and says, if I secede, will y'all secede with me? They all agreed to it. On the 20th day of December, 1860, South Carolina secedes from the Union. 2 weeks later, 1st of January, Mississippi secedes with Florida right behind it. Then Alabama, then Georgia. So secession is going to be South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, and Georgia. The people here in our area were part of what is called Walton County. And Walton County voted not to secede from the Union. So did Escambia County. These two counties on the north, on the very west end of Northwest Florida, voted not to secede from the Union. We had too much ties with the northern areas when it came to cotton and came to other agricultural products here. Mobile voted not to secede from the Union. So your more progressive areas did not want to secede because they saw trouble on the horizon. The rest of Florida decided to secede. Okay? A few weeks later, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Texas secede from the Union. By the time of the inauguration on March the 4th, 1861, 7 southern states have seceded from the Union. James Buchanan says, I have no power to stop them. The Constitution does not give me authority to stop them. The Constitution does not discuss how states secede from the Union. So therefore, it's Mr. Lincoln's problem. Let Lincoln solve the problem once he takes the office of president. Buchanan did nothing. He's guilty of treason, let the country fall apart in this time period. Okay? What would have Andrew Jackson have done when South Carolina seceded in December? And what would he have done the second week of January, Mississippi and Florida seceded? And the third week when Alabama and Georgia seceded, what would he have done? He brought in federal troops with a military governor and occupied these states. He would have stopped secession before it began. Mr. Buchanan did not do it. And a lot of people decide that James Buchanan was the worst president in American history. He's always the bottom of the list because he did not preserve the Union. And now America's on the doorstep to a civil war. The next lecture, number 11, is going to deal with the war. And we'll have that here in a little bit. All right, that's it for this one.